Okay, well, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning. Good Erev Shabbos, everybody. This morning, I'd like to discuss a fascinating mitzvah, the mitzvah of tcheles, the blue string that you very often see people have in their talesim, their tzitzis. Interesting enough, tzitzis itself is a fascinating mitzvah. The Torah says that on every four-cornered garment, you have to put on tzitzis, which reminds us that in days of yore, in the ancient world, before you had sewing machines, people would drape themselves in a sheet-like garment, like a toga or like a Mexican poncho, which had four corners. And all four-cornered garments, the Torah says, you have to put on tzitzis, these tassels or fringes wrapped in a certain way. And one of the ingredients in these tassels, in these tzitzis that you put on your four-cornered garment, is a blue strand known as tcheles. What exactly is tcheles? How important is it to the mitzvah of tzitzis? And again, a whole separate discussion is the whole mitzvah of tzitzis itself doesn't apply if you're not wearing a four-cornered garment. So early on, when people learned how to sew, people no longer wore four-cornered garments. So then there was no mitzvah of tzitzis. And what the rabbis decided to do was that we should take upon ourselves to wear a small four-cornered garment to which we could put tzitzis and thereby fulfill an extra mitzvah, which is what Minhag Yisrael is. We all men, boys, men, wear a four-cornered garment to which we attach tzitzis. But the tzitzis themselves, the Torah says, you have to put a tcheles. What's the pasuk? I'm blanking out at the moment. 1 second. Get the exact pasuk here. Al kanfev the hevedorasam v'nosnu al tzitzis hakanof. On the corner of your tzitzis, you have to put pesil tcheles, a strand of tcheles. What is tcheles? What is tcheles? Do we have tcheles today? Did they have it then? How did you make it? How do you identify it? So, and a number of questions. If you don't have tcheles, can you still perform the mitzvah of tzitzis? Do you how important ingredient is it? A mitzvah b'fnei atzma? Is it an independent mitzvah to have tcheles? Is tcheles independent mitzvah, or is it part of the generic mitzvah of tzitzis? And we have to put tzitzis on our garments, and the tzitzis has to have tcheles. So the Mishnah has a discussion about this, and ultimately it says hatcheles eino ma'akev esalavan va'alavan eino ma'akev esatcheles, that one does not prevent the other mitzvah from being fulfilled. In other words, if you don't have tcheles, you can still fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis on your four-cornered garment. Rabbi, the author of the compiler of the Mishnah, disagrees with this position, and he says, no, you can't fulfill the mitzvah unless you have tcheles in your tzitzis. So tcheles is a very important ingredient. The Rambam follows the Chachamim, as the halacha is, that tcheles and lavan are not ma'akev one another. However, they are not two independent mitzvahs, but rather part of one unified mitzvah. It's part of a mitzvah, but one does not prevent the mitzvah from falling apart if you don't have one ingredient. So you can still have non-tcheles tzitzis and fulfill the mitzvah. There's a whole discussion as to why it's one mitzvah when there are two separate parts to it, because actually it's a single action fulfills each part of the mitzvah, and the mitzvah is putting it on your body, whether it has tcheles or doesn't have tcheles, and so forth. There's a whole discussion how, and if you do have tcheles, how do you wrap it? How do you have these blue strings wrapped? Is it supposed to be all tcheles? Is it woven in? How many strands are tcheles? If you go into any of these stores in Meir Shiurim that sell tzitzis, it's a chart. It's a hanging chart of about 15 different ways of tying tzitzis with and without tcheles. I don't know if is it clear? I can't tell if you can see it or not. Yes. And each one is labeled with the name of the rabbi. The Rishon, Achronim. The first one here, the first blue and white one is the way Rav Shechter, who was a big proponent of tzitzis, did. It's interesting when you look at these charts or these boards. It has the Rambam, it has Tosfos, the Baalei Itor, the Chinuch, the Gra, Breslov, Rav Shechter, Slonim, the Ben Ish Chai, Chabad, the Yari, all different types. So I was in a store in Meir Shiurim, and I pointed to one of the sets of tzitzis, and where it said Rav Shechter, and I say, I know him. And the Hasidic fellow in the store, when you all the other tzitzis, they are all from Rishonim and Achronim, and he says to me, Lepnoch? He's still alive? Because he didn't know who Rav Shechter was. All right. Separate joke. In any event, I won't get into the details of the machlokas of whether it's lava and ma'akev, is it one mitzvah? Is it part of it? That's a technical. However, the poskim come down and on both sides of this issue. The Maharam of Rutenberg and his student the Rush had a big machlokas. Maharam, who was one of the last Baalei Tosfos, he says we have to be concerned for the opinion of Rabbi that tcheles is ma'akev, and the practical input of that is that if you don't have tcheles, and tcheles prevents the mitzvah from being fulfilled bishleimusa in its proper way, then how do you wear tzitzis on Shabbos in a Rishus HaRabim? It's not you're carrying. So there's a halachic implication there. The Rosh, of course, disagrees with his Rebbe, and he says we're not concerned about Rebbe's opinion because we follow the Chachamim. And the Tur adds that if we were really concerned for Rebbe's opinion, then we wouldn't make a bracha on the mitzvah of tzitzis. Most people, the majority of people, even today, do not have tcheles in their tzitzis. Up until maybe 15, 20 years ago, you never saw tcheles, at least in the modern period. And the Shulchan Aruch Paskin, of course, that you can wear tzitzis on Shabbos, even if it doesn't have tcheles in it, because it's not ma'akev. So basically, we have to figure out a serious question. What is tcheles? What is this blue string? What is this blue dye that the Torah says you have to have in your tzitzis, preferably? And there are many, many things that we lost when the destruction of the temple took place. For a generation or two after Churban Beis HaMikdash, people may have remembered certain things, people may have known certain things, but after a while, a lot of things we had in the Beis HaMikdash kind of just disappeared. And the rabbis in the Gemara were tasked with trying to recreate some of the things that we lost, either through svara or through logic, when you didn't have a direct minhag or definition of what these things were. So we're told that the dye, the tcheles dye is a bluish dye. So when you look at the tzitzis, urisemoso uzachartem, you look at the tzitzis and you remind yourself of Hashem. How? Because the blue reminds you of the ocean, and the ocean reflects the sky, and the sky shamayim. So that's part of that connection. Is it bright blue? Is it dark blue? A lot of discussion in the Gemara about it. But where does the dye come from? Is it a plant? Is it a dye from a plant? Is there some other source? So the dye is, we told, comes from a creature in the sea known as the chilazon. Now, the chilazon is not identified other than the fact that it's very rare and it surfaces once in 70 years. And what you do is you squeeze out the blood, and the blood is a bluish color, and that's, you mix it with some other stuff, and there's a whole recipe for that, and that's where the cheles comes from. After the Churban Beis Hamikdash, we lost our Masorah as to what this chilazon is. What type of a creature from the sea? Is it a fish? Is it a crustacean? Is it a mollusk? What is it? And we don't know what it is. And from the time the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed up until the late 19th century, nobody had definitive knowledge of what the chilazon was. Come the Regina Rebbe, Rav Gershon Leiner, he died in 1891, and he researched this. He felt very strong that we have to have cheles in our tzitzis, and he said that the cheles comes from the common cuttlefish. And he produced a whole technology to mass-produce cheles strings, and he tried to convince the rabbanim of his generation that this was the real cheles. He was unsuccessful. He tried to convince the Beis Halevi and other rabbanim, and they basically said, for thousands of years we've lived without it, and we don't have a Masorah, so therefore they weren't. It wasn't accepted. The Regina Hasidim wore cheles because the Rebbe said to, but it never took hold. Fast forward another 50 years or so, and Rabbi Yitzchak Herzog, the first, the chief rabbi of Great Britain, came up with his PhD dissertation, I think it was Cambridge, on cheles. And he worked with chemists, and he created different types of dyes. And he said that the cuttlefish was not the source of the cheles, because he said any organic blood from other fish mixing with chemicals. And he came up and said that the cuttlefish was not it, and he came up with the solution that the source of the cheles, the chilazon, was really the Murex trunculus. It was a bivalve. It was a mollusk, the Murex trunculus, and he produced cheles, which was more purple than blue. But scientists later on came to the conclusion with adding certain chemicals that came out to a true blue color. Others suggested another fish, the janthina, but that never went anywhere. So pretty much the only two commercially viable forms for cheles were either the cuttlefish or the Murex trunculus. And pretty much we've accepted the Murex trunculus as the source for what traditional cheles was. There are different tests to prove that it really is the real cheles, because there is a plant dye known as kala ilan, which is the exact same color. And some people used it to make fraudulent cheles. There was apparently a market in counterfeit cheles strings, I guess. So they used kala ilan was a lot cheaper to produce. In any event, this is the Gemara, the technical discussions that you can't extract the cheles on Shabbos, what the malacha it might be. It's interesting that one of the discussions has to do, you can't kill on Shabbos. You can't kill anytime, but you can't, like shecht or something. So by squeezing out the blood from this Murex trunculus, you will kill it. And the second opinion is that, well, your intention is not to kill it, but to keep it alive so it can produce more of the dye. It's a whole technical discussion. In any event, the Gemara implies that if you have Kala Ilan tzitzis, as opposed to real tcheles, it's still yotze, because if it's not ma'akev, so whatever the colors might be, you can make tzitzis out of green or orange, strings as well. Or the color is not ma'akev. That's important.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I think it was about 4 years ago. Our son, his wife, and the 3 boys were in Israel, and they signed up. I don't remember where it was located, but there's like a beach, and they actually let you go and like gather the chilazon thing. You're not permitted to take any. They're very, very strict, obviously, but they explain the whole thing about chelet, and then the group can go in and look for them and harvest them and bring them to the people that are in charge.
Yes, there is a whole factory, and they run fascinating tours to show you how they extract the tcheles. And again, this was something that the Regina Rebbe popularized. It didn't go anywhere. Rav Herzog tried it, also didn't go anywhere. And it was only until Rav Schechter, Herschel Schechter at Yeshiva University, popularized the importance of tcheles from the Murex trunculus, and he started doing this. I mean, Rav Soloveitchik, his Rebbe, did not have tcheles. I mean, when I went to yeshiva, nobody had tcheles. But shortly thereafter, Rav Schechter began popularizing this, and his students and students of his students, and it spread throughout the YU community. And that's why you see many, many people today in shul with tcheles strands on their talesim and on their tzitzis as well. Different variations of how you tie the knots. The normal variation is the wrapping around is 7, 8, 11, 13. That's how many wraps around it. But you follow the Rambam, Rav Schechter, and the Gra, and each one has a different cheshbon as to how you wrap the tzitzis, which strings are blue, which strings are white, and it became very, very, very popular. How many strings should be blue? Is it 4? Is it more? Is it 2? Machlokes, Rishonim, and again, I showed you that chart. There are at least a dozen different ways of tying your tzitzis. Minhag Ashkenaz, interesting, follows the Tosfos that if your tzitzis tear, for example, but some of the tzitzis remain, it's still kosher to wear the talis. I mean, we are usually very makbid if tzitzis are torn on a talis katan or on a regular talis. We don't make a bracha on it, but technically you probably could, as long as you have 2 of the 4 strands intact, and that you could still make the bracha on the tzitzis. Others say no, it's called gardumim, and that if any of the strands are torn, then you have to replace it. But
and workout.
But the whole notion of tzitzis, we try, and then this. Why was Rav Schechter being so makpid, and why are people being makpid on tcheles? For thousands of years, we didn't have it. So first of all, the Torah says you should put tcheles on your tzitzis, and if we have the opportunity to do this mitzvah, we should. The fact that nobody knew what tcheles was until the mid-20th century, where the scientists put together all the halachic points of view with the chemists and so forth, and they came up with the formula, and they followed the recipe. Now we should. But on the other hand, you have the vast majority of Gedolim and Poskim don't have tcheles. Moshe Feinstein didn't have tcheles, Lubavitcher Rebbe. I guarantee if Lubavitcher Rebbe had tcheles and tzitzis, you'd see it everywhere. You don't see that. Rav Soloveitchik himself did not have tcheles. Rav Schechter in the beginning also did not have tcheles, but somewhere around, I guess, the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, he decided that let's go for it. And the Tcheles Institute in Israel was a big help in this, and they scientifically produced it, and now it's quite prevalent. How you tie it, whether you follow Rav Shechter's cheshbon of tying the knots, you follow the Gra, you follow the Rambam. There are many different variations of how people tie their tzitzis. But it all fits in my mind anyway, it fits into the category of Zeh Keli V'Anveyu. This is a category known as Hidur Mitzvah. If you're doing a mitzvah, especially a biblical mitzvah, even rabbinic to a large extent, but if you're doing a mitzvah, try to enhance that mitzvah as much as you can. It doesn't affect the observance, but we try to enhance it, yes.
So Rabbi Schechter, and I've heard him say this very succinctly, Suffolk Deraisa.
Right. So Suffolk Deraisa L'chumra can be applied in different ways. If it's a Suffolk Deraisa, that would mean that you may not be required to wear tzitzis if you don't have tcheles, because you don't want to make a bracha on it. The whole mitzvah of tzitzis today is rabbinic. It's not Deraisa. If you're not wearing a four-cornered garment, you don't have to wear. You don't put tzitzis on. We don't wear four-cornered garments anymore. So the rabbis, so the minhag was, so we purposely purchase a four-cornered garment to which we can attach tzitzis. That argument, Safed Araisa L'chumra, that Rav Schechter is advocating, has caught on among his Talmidim and among the YU crowd, but the vast majority of poskim don't necessarily agree with that. And outside the YU circle, perhaps in Israel in some places, but you don't. It's not universally accepted yet. Maybe it will be. But going back to the Zekeli V'Anveyu of Hidur Mitzvah, if we're doing the mitzvah already, Im Kvar Askvar, as Rabbi Yudin would say, if you're doing it already, then do it with a little bit more of a Hidur and try to go for Tcheles. We do this with so many other mitzvahs. Hanukkah is a classic example. We have fancy menorahs, and the fact that each person lights every single night and add a candle. It's all part of Hidur Mitzvah. To have a fancy Megillah case, or to get that Torah on your talus. These are all enhancements of the. So if you're doing a mitzvah, you try to enhance the mitzvah. You're doing mitzvah of tzitzis, you enhance the mitzvah. But again, at this point, I would say that the mitzvah of tcheles is ongoing. In other words, it has not achieved universal acceptance in the Jewish community yet. Whether it'll increase over time and more people go in, fine, that may happen. But right now, the vast majority of people, and certainly if you look, whenever you have a gathering of Gedolim, I don't think you'll see too many of them, or any of them, to my knowledge, wearing tcheles. The Rosh Yeshiva in general do not wear tcheles. I'm trying to think, even at YU, other than Rav Shechter's disciples, I don't think you'll see tcheles. And certainly in the Hasidic world. But eventually it may catch on. There's nothing wrong with it. And certainly if we have the recipe and the formula, and the chemists have validated it, it's a wonderful thing to do. But it has not yet caught on in the yeshivish world or the Orthodox Jewish world. In Israel, you see it more and more often, because that's where the Tcheles Institute is located, and some of the more modern rabbis are in favor of it. But as I say, it's a mitzvah that is evolving. You could fulfill the mitzvah without Tcheles, but is it a Hidur mitzvah to have tcheles? Probably. So again, I am not posting that everybody should go out and buy tcheles, but if you do get it, make sure it comes from a reliable source, and that it is from the Chila zone and not from the cuttlefish or not from Kala Ilan, but it is the real deal. But whatever we can do to enhance our mitzvos, we should try to do. But given the fact that it's a machlokas in the Mishnah already, that tcheles, and we paskin, tcheles is not ma'akev es halavan, It does not in any way affect the mitzvah of tzitzis, whether it's your talis cotton or your talis gadol. People have been kind of reluctant to push the envelope, so to speak. But more and more you see it, and whether it'll happen in the next 50 years or not, you'll notice more and more people have tcheles in their talesim. Which knots they tie, as I said, you have a dozen different variations to experiment with. Anyhow, I just thought I would share that with you. It's a fascinating mitzvah, and you'll see it more and more often as we go along, and time will tell.
Question.
Wally,
Yes. Question.
you go first, Shiur.
Okay, I'm just curious. I'm sure I would imagine that you know the answer, but you know the major influx of people, the chayalim wanting tzitzit and everything. So like they're frantically tying more tzitzit in Israel. I wonder which, you know, according to which of their, like it's supposed to be one specific way of tying.
I do not think that all those tzitzis that are being made for chayalim have tcheles in it. I have not seen that. Could be.
The shita of how you tie them. You showed
How
us.
you tie it, that depends who's doing the tying. It's fascinating. If you go to some of these small stores in Mea She'arim, you've got guys sitting in the corner, and all they're doing is tying tzitzis, depending on what the person who bought it wants. And as I said, this chart is an amazing. You have a dozen different ways to tie the tzitzis, different knots, with white, blue, different ways. As I said, the normal way of doing it and the fastest way of doing it is 7, 8, 11, 13. Wrapping it in a double knot, wrapping it again. But there are variations of that. And if you're using tcheles, there are even more variations to how the tcheles should appear. Does it appear in 2 strings? Does it appear on one side or on both sides? How is it wrapped around? These are minhag. So if the guy is a Chabadnik and he's making tzitzis, he'll wrap it a certain way. If he's a Sephardi following the Ari, he'll wrap it a different way. There are many, many differences. The Breslovers have it a different way. When you follow Shitas, the Vilna Gaon or the Rambam, they all have different ways of tying it. It's interesting that the Gemara itself doesn't really tell you in detail how to tie it. It just says where the tzitzis, but there's a Torah Shebal Peh as to what those tzitzis should look like, what those tassels should look like. Mendy, you had a question.
Yes, this is a general question about tzitzis. As a child, when you get up and put on your talis katan, you make a bracha.
Yes.
Correct? Right. As a married adult, you do not. Basically, when you put on your talis, I think later on you have in mind.
Had in mind.
But isn't there a general principle that we don't put off a mitzvah? Especially if you're saying that this is so-called even from the Raisa, why don't you make the bracha when you put on your talis katan and have in mind for your talis for later on?
Well, because the talis katan is really rabbinic. It's not biblical. Because the fact that we put on a talis katan is a minhag that the Rabbanim instituted in order for us to fulfill the biblical mitzvah. But the putting it on itself, the institution of it is rabbinic. That the talis gadol is the greater mitzvah. The only time you make a bracha on your tzitzis is on Tisha B'Av in the morning. The Tisha B'Av in the morning, you don't put on a talis. You don't daven with a talis. So you make the bracha on your tzitzis. A lot of people forget that because your minhag every morning is not to do it.
Correct.
Tisha B'Av, you have to make a bracha, and not only on Tisha B'Av, but also lo aleinu if you're burying a parent, or you don't, or if you're an avel, or not an avel, but if you are about to become an avel before a funeral, you don't daven in the morning. You don't put on tefillin. Machlok is whether you put on tefillin when you come back from the cemetery, with a bracha, without a bracha, or all together. But normally on the day of a funeral, you're exempt from all mitzvahs, so you don't. So but you make a bracha on your talis katan because you're not putting on a talis gadol. Other than that, it's a rabbinic practice, and the mitzvah is on the tzitzis, not on the putting on the talis katan. So the real mitzvah of tzitzis on the talis gadol, what you put on later on.
Wally,
Yes.
Wally, how many people that wear techeles in the talis also put it on their talis katan?
I would think that they all do. If
They
you're already going that route and you're putting tcheles in your talis gadol, I would say most people, if they're doing it, well, let me rephrase that. If they're from the yeshiva world, then they will have it on their talis katan as well. If there are people who just wear it because it's a cute thing to do, I can't speak for that. But if you're doing it from the yeshiva world perspective, from a halakhic perspective, then you'd put it. If you need tcheles, you need it on both, and you'll see people with that tzitzis out that it's tcheles.
Okay, but that was my next question. Is that only for people who wear the talis katan tzitzis out?
No.
If you don't wear your tzitzis out, can you still wear talis katan with techeles?
Absolutely.
You can.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh.
One has nothing to do with the other. If you wear it out, you don't wear it out. One has. If you have tcheles, you have tcheles. It should be in both. And most of the time, you'll see that. You'll see that.
Question, going back to saying the bracha, obviously it does not apply to me, but you said that my question is a man who never gets married or has not yet gotten married and follows the custom of not wearing a talis unless he's married.
Yes.
Does that mean he always would say the bracha when he puts on his talit katan because he's wearing a regular talit? But
well, if you follow the Ashkenazic custom of non-German Jews, Germans wear talesim when they're bar mitzvah, but most Ashkenazim don't put on a talis until they get married. So you would just make a bracha on your talis katan. If you happen to get an aliyah in shul, you put a talis on. That's not the same thing. But you make your bracha on your talis katan because you're not wearing a regular talis gadol every day during davening. However, there are a number of situations where a single guy who wants to wear a talis can. I remember there was a fellow at yeshiva when I was there who wanted to wear a talis. He wasn't married, and the Rav said, "Go for it." So he would not make a bracha on his talis cut; he'd make it on his talis gadol. It's just a minute whether you wear it when you're bar mitzvah or when you get married. People wear it, but if you're not wearing a talis gadol, you only make your bracha on the talis katan.
But what about a person that's 50 years old and still is not married?
He can wear a talis if he wants. He can wear a talis.
No, should he put it on? Is there a point where, yay, I'm an adult, I should put on a talis?
That is a personal choice. There are some people who might, who are single for a long time, and in order not to stick out as a single person, they'll wear a talis.
No, but is it a halacha that at a certain point you have to put on a talis?
No. So it's all minhag.
Okay.
Not a halacha at all. I mean, I know many single men who are in their 30s or 40s or even 50s. In order to avoid all kinds of discussion, they'll wear a talis. So nobody will point to, this guy is still an alto bacher, he's still not married. So they'll wear a talis just to avoid pointing out the fact that they're not married. But there's certainly no of that.
Wally,
Yes.
putting on a talis is a mitzvah from the Torah, correct?
No, the mitzvah is to put tzitzis on a four-cornered garment. That's the real mitzvah. So we wear a talis when we daven in order to fulfill that mitzvah with the tzitzis.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Wally,
Yes.
is there an obligation to wear a talis after your spouse is deceased or divorced?
I was just going to ask that.
It's a great question. I think once you've put on a talis already, so you keep it on.
Even in the case of divorce as well, doesn't make a difference deceased or divorced.
No, I don't think. I think once you start wearing a tallis, then you keep it on already. I would think so. Yeah. Yeah. That'd be my opinion on that.
Okay.
Anything else? It's an interesting question because I'm thinking of a parallel to that. If a married woman who covers her hair
Exactly.
is divorced or becomes a widow, does she still have to cover her hair?
I don't think so in that case because you now
Technically,
of her ability to get remarried.
right. Technically not, but I know many cases where women just keep on. Now, again, depends how old you are when you become divorced or widowed. If you're still marriageable, then in many cases, women will take off the head covering after a period of time in order to find a suitable mate to get remarried. If a woman becomes a widow or a divorcee later on in life and she has no intention of getting remarried, she may continue covering her hair just to ward off potential suitors, I guess. I don't know. It's an interesting question, but technically she would not be required to cover her hair. But I guess that's a question of personal preference. Okay.